Hello, everyone. I'd like to extend a thank you for joining us for today's webinar on LIMS, Myths, and Legends Busted. Before we begin, I'd like to also thank Megan for making this all possible. My name is Alexios Kronis, and I have been an informatics consultant with CSols, Inc. for the past 7 years. Being a LIMS consultant has allowed me the opportunity to work in many different industries and laboratories, including pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, and even forensics. Now, before coming to CSols, I was a LIMS administrator for 8+ years in the pharmaceutical and manufacturing sectors, specializing in LIMS development, process improvement, and training. My background and experience has not only provided me insight into various LIMS products, but also seeing LIMS from a user perspective in and outside of the laboratory setting. Today, we will be discussing and tackling some of the most common myths regarding LIMS. Now, these range from standard legends throughout many industries and more common myths that we hear from our clients and even our own experiences over the years. Now, these misconceptions can definitely have an impact on how companies move forward in deciding if LIMS is right for them, in selecting an adequate system that meets their needs, and even improving their current processes. So in the next hour, we will address these myths and try to shed some light on what is true and what is false. We will also be including a few myths that were submitted by the attendees of this webinar as well. Now, although there are more legends out there than LIMS systems, we can put them in specific categories. For today's top 10 myths, we are placing them under the following categories. LIMS in general. Now, these are myths that include some misconceptions and viewpoints about LIMS overall as a complete system. Then we'll move into LIMS implementation. So these are myths that are regarding LIMS implementation projects, including areas of overall total work needed, the configuration, and design as well. We'll then move over to LIMS automation and interfacing. Now, these myths can include instrument interfacing, system integration, and even lab automation. And then finally, we'll move over to LIMS support and resources. These include myths regarding LIMS project support, available resources, and even a team setup. So we will go through each one of these categories, evaluate each myth presented, and debunk the ones that are false. So let's get started. LIMS in general. So myth number 1, any LIMS will work for me. Well, at a high level, LIMS are pretty much the same. The main purpose of a LIMS is for data and sample management, to capture, display, and output data and results, and track samples through their entire life cycle. However, when you look at each LIMS more closely, you will find that most of them are quite different in regards to infrastructure, features, and some other areas. Now, some additional features can include standards and reagent management, inventory management, stability studies, and calibration maintenance. Now, most LIMS these days tend to be browser-based, while some older systems are client-based. Now, browser-based LIMS can run off of web browsers like Internet Explorer or even Google Chrome, making it easier for users to access anywhere. Client-based LIMS systems must be installed and accessed on a user's PC or a laptop. Now, some LIMS are built with plug-and-play features as well, Now, these are where modules can be added or activated as needed, while other LIMS provides the customers with a suite of features up front. So let's look at this in a couple different sections. So plug-and-play modules allow users the ability to tailor their LIMS and exactly what they need, and add or enable modules that they need at a later time. Now, on the other hand, a system suite usually provides a compilation of features for users and laboratories, but some may have to be disabled if they are not needed or they are not ready to be used at that time of implementation. It's, if you think about it, it's almost like buying a car. So a car has a specific trim package that may be added by the customer during a purchase, giving the customer an example, or giving us an example of plug and play. A car that already has 2 or 3 packages may be purchased. Even though the customer doesn't really want the moonroof, they can simply not use it. Now, with technology always pushing boundaries, we also need to discuss cloud computing and LIMS software as a service, or SaaS. Now, this approach allows companies to pay for software with subscriptions rather than full licenses, while reducing the cost associated with in-house equipment. Now, this can be potentially more viable for smaller companies if they do not have the space, the infrastructure, or even the budget to implement a LIMS on site. Now, there is yet another layer of complexity with LIMS that pertains to LIMS that are all-purpose versus those that are purpose-built. Now, these two types have different advantages and disadvantages in regards to installation, sample processing, and even regulation application.